Ethan Miller's peaceful farm was being destroyed day after day as Karen Whitmore treated his fields like her personal racetrack. Her entitled arrogance and relentless shortcuts flattened crops, disturbed beehives, and left him feeling powerless. But Ethan turned her predictable path into a clever trap, using harmless obstacles to reclaim his land and dignity. And just wait until you see how his brilliant strategy forced Karen to retreat and restored justice to the farm. This story's turn of events is unforgettable. Ethan Miller had always believed that a farm was more than just land. It was a sanctuary, a living, breathing testament to hard work, patience, and care. The Miller family farm had been in his family for generations, and every inch of it bore their sweat and love. Rolling fields of golden wheat swayed gently in the breeze. A small orchard of apple and cherry trees stood proudly near the edge of the property, and a patch of wild flowers, untamed and colorful, seemed to dance with every gust of wind. It was here that Ethan found his peace, rising before dawn to tend to the crops, feeling the soil crumble beneath his hands and listening to the soft hum of bees among the blossoms. Life was steady, predictable, and satisfying, until Karen Whitmore arrived. Karen, the epitome of entitlement wrapped in designer clothing and polished shoes, had moved into the neighborhood only a year ago, but it didn't take long for her reputation to spread. As the most vocal and, in her own mind, influential HOA member, she seemed to operate above the rules that governed everyone else. While most people in the community quietly minded their own business, Karen had made it her mission to assert dominance wherever she went, and Ethan's farm, with its open fields and lack of fencing along certain areas, had become her personal racetrack. It started subtly at first, a tire mark here, a crushed patch of grass there, but soon escalated. Her shiny black SUV, sleek and intimidating, would roar across his property multiple times a day, leaving long, angry ruts across the soft soil and flattening the crops that Ethan had nurtured for months. Each time she drove through, it wasn't just the physical damage that stung, it was the attitude behind it. The smug, self-satisfied look on her face as if she were untouchable. She treated Ethan's land not as a living, breathing space, but as an obstacle course for her convenience. Ethan tried reasoning. He approached her politely one afternoon, hoping a calm conversation could resolve the matter. "Karen," he began, trying to keep his voice steady, "these fields aren't a road. You're damaging crops and it's my property." She had smiled, a cold, condescending smile, and waved a dismissive hand. "It's just a shortcut, Ethan. Don't be so dramatic." The words had sliced through him. Not just the shortcut, not just the damage, but the casual disregard for his life's work. That morning, the anger finally broke its dam. Ethan stepped outside as the crisp autumn air bit at his cheeks, expecting the usual calm of dawn on his farm. Instead, his heart sank as his gaze fell on a fresh trail of tire tracks, cutting straight through his sunflowers. The stalks, tall and golden only the day before, were now bent and broken, the flowers drooping as if in silent protest. His chest tightened, his stomach knotted. He felt a hot surge of rage rise from deep within, a feeling that burned brighter with each step he took toward the destruction. "This is my land," he shouted, fists clenched, voice cracking with emotion. He stomped through the mud, the scent of upturned earth mixing with the sweet aroma of the flowers, trying to comprehend how someone could be so brazen. Each tire rut seemed to mock him, each flattened bloom a deliberate insult. He knew Karen would smile if she could see him now. She thrived on proving others powerless. But the rules, the HOA regulations, the warnings, they all seemed like thin paper shields against her entitlement. Ethan's fury wasn't born from a single act of vandalism. It had accumulated over weeks, mounting each time her vehicle tore across the fields. It wasn't just the crops, it was the principle. The audacity of someone using privilege to override fairness, to diminish hard work without consequence, ignited a fire inside him. He could almost see Karen in her SUV, sunglasses reflecting the morning sun, waving at him as if he were the absurd one for caring about a patch of land. The injustice of it consumed him, wrapping around his mind like thick fog. How could someone flaunt power so carelessly, so arrogantly? How could a community allow such blatant disrespect to go unchecked? Each moment Ethan stood there, surveying the ruined sunflowers and gouged earth. He felt a mixture of disbelief and indignation that left him trembling. The farm had been his refuge, his pride, and now it had become a battleground, not by choice, but because of Karen's relentless disregard. And in that bitter dawn light, as he stared at the tire tracks cutting an ugly scar through his sanctuary, Ethan felt a fierce, unwavering resolve begin to stir beneath the anger. Something had to change. Someone had to put an end to this, and he would be the one to do it. The destruction on Ethan's farm seemed to worsen with every passing day. It wasn't just the sunflowers anymore. The cornfield, once standing tall and proud like golden sentinels under the morning sun, now bore deep furrows where Karen's SUV had barreled through. The stalks lay flattened, some snapped entirely, spilling tender ears of corn onto the churned mud. Ethan knelt down, brushing his hands across the wet soil, feeling the rough texture of the broken stems. Each kernel that had fallen to the ground felt like a tiny betrayal, a reminder of how fragile his hard work truly was. The orchard wasn't spared either. Tomatoes that had glowed a perfect red in the afternoon sunlight now squished under the pressure of tires, staining the earth with streaks of pulp. His small apple trees had been jostled so violently that some fruit was bruised beyond salvage, and the delicate cherry blossoms had lost their hold on the branches. Even his prized beehives, the lifeblood of pollination across the farm, had been disturbed. The bees, once calm and diligent, buzzed angrily, disoriented by the vibrations and chaos. Ethan watched helplessly from a distance, the buzzing filling the air like a mournful chorus of his failing control. Each day the sense of helplessness gnawed at him. Ethan tried calling the HOA, explaining the repeated trespasses, documenting the damage, showing photographs of flattened fields and ruined crops, but the HOA's response was a polite shrug, citing their jurisdiction limitations and hinting that disputes like these were best handled privately. Local authorities were no better. They expressed concern but ultimately deferred to HOA governance, leaving Ethan with no legal recourse. He felt as though he were being pushed into a corner, forced to watch as his livelihood was steadily undermined. Friends and neighbors sympathized. They would stand by, offer a comforting word, or help him repair small patches of damage. But sympathy, as Ethan soon realized, couldn't undo crushed cornstalks. It couldn't mend a disturbed hive, and it certainly couldn't replace the sense of safety and ownership he had once felt. Neighbors whispered about Karen behind her back, yet most were too cautious to confront her directly. Fear of her influence, her sharp tongue, and her connections kept them scent. The isolation weighed on Ethan heavily, making every step through his farm feel lonelier than the last. Even Max, his loyal dog, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. Normally playful and protective, Max would grow tense whenever Karen's SUV roared down the street, whining and pacing near the edges of the fields. His ears would perk at the distant engine noise, and he would glance toward Ethan as if asking, "Why is this happening? What can we do?" Ethan would kneel beside him, ruffling his fur and murmuring reassurances, but even that small comfort was fleeting. The anxiety that Max carried mirrored Ethan's own, a silent companion to the frustration and sorrow that had settled into his chest. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the horizon, Ethan walked the length of his property, his boots sinking into the muddy ruts that now scarred the earth. The soft amber light fell on the broken stems, bruised fruit, and churned up soil, highlighting the extent of the desecration. The orchard's delicate scent of apples and wildflowers was overpowered by the sharp, earthy smell of overturned soil and trampled vegetation. Ethan's shoulders slumped, exhaustion pressing down on him like a physical weight. He paused, hands on his knees, and let the silence wash over him. For years he had nurtured this farm, invested every ounce of his energy, pride, and hope into it. And now it felt as if all of that had been ignored, trampled, and mocked. The injustice didn't just sting, it carved deep into his sense of purpose, making him question whether determination alone could ever shield him from those who acted without conscience. As darkness crept over the fields, the frustration and sorrow melded into a crushing weight of despair. The farm he loved so dearly had become a battleground where rules, fairness, and reason seemed powerless. Ethan sat on a fallen log, Max at his side, staring at the remnants of the sunflowers swaying in the evening breeze. He felt the enormity of the situation pressing on him from every side. This wasn't just damage to property, it was a challenge to his patience, to his pride, and to the very foundation of the life he had built. And yet, amid the suffocating helplessness, a quiet, stubborn ember of determination began to glow. Something inside Ethan whispered that surrender wasn't an option, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, he would find a way to protect what was his. But for now, as the sky faded to deep indigo and the first stars began to appear, the pain was undeniable. The farm he had built with love and sweat was hurting, and so was he, trapped in the slow, suffocating grip of injustice. Ethan had spent days trudging through his battered fields, examining every rut and broken stem, his mind racing for a solution that didn't involve confrontation he couldn't win. One quiet afternoon, as he reviewed the tear tracks in the mud, a realization struck him. Karen's shortcuts weren't random. Every morning around exactly 7:15, her glossy black SUV would roar down the same path. And in the evenings, the same route, slightly faster, slightly louder. The pattern was clear, predictable, almost mechanical. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of possibility. If Karen relied on predictability, then predictability could be turned against her. The thought ignited a spark of determination he hadn't felt since the early days of the destruction. No more feeling powerless. No more watching his farm get trampled while helplessly counting the losses. If he could anticipate her movements, he could create consequences she hadn't accounted for, without ever putting himself or anyone else in danger. That night, under the pale glow of the moon, Ethan worked quietly in his fields. The air smelled of wet soil and autumn leaves, a crisp reminder of the season's turn. He placed old tomato barrels strategically along the path, filling gaps with soft mud traps that would sink under the weight of tires, and arranged hay bales in areas where her SUV would naturally drift to avoid the ruts. Each obstacle was carefully calculated, designed to be messy and inconvenient but completely harmless. No one would get hurt, not a single person or animal. It was a test of patience and respect, a message she couldn't ignore. Ethan worked in slunts, moving with precision as Max trailed beside him, his tail flicking nervously. For hours he adjusted angles, measured distances, and imagined Karen's predictable path through the chaos he was creating. Each placement gave him a quiet thrill. For weeks he had felt like a victim. Now he was the strategist, the one setting the stage. A cautious optimism crept in, a sense that the tide could finally turn. By dawn, the plan was ready. Ethan stepped back and surveyed the field. The morning mist hovered over the soil, curling around the barrels and hay bales, transforming the farm into a strange tactical landscape. He could almost imagine Karen behind the wheel, unsuspecting, full of confidence, thinking she would continue her daily domination of the fields. But this time, the outcome would be different. When Karen's SUV finally appeared on the horizon, glinting in the early sunlight, Ethan held his breath. The familiar roar of the engine grew louder as she approached. At first, it seemed nothing had changed. She was moving at her usual pace, following the route she knew so well. Then the tires sank into the first mud trap, splashing up a mess that coated the vehicle and the undercarriage. Ethan suppressed a grin. The SUV swerved instinctively, sliding toward the hay bales, which nudged it off course just enough to force her to stop. Mud squelched beneath the tires again, and she let out a startled squeal, her carefully cultivated composure cracking under the unexpected resistance. Ethan watched from a distance, adrenaline pumping, heart hammering in his chest. He felt a surge of vindication, a mix of relief and triumph that he hadn't realized he was capable of feeling after weeks of helplessness. This was no longer just defending his farm. This was taking control, turning frustration into action, and seeing the first real signs of progress. Each splash of mud, each bump against the barrels was a small victory, a reminder that cleverness and patience could outweigh arrogance and entitlement. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to breathe freely. The fear and frustration that had shadowed every step through his fields were slowly replaced by a sense of agency. He realized that hope didn't come from luck or from external rules. It came from his own ability to strategize, to act, and to reclaim what had been lost. Watching Karen wrestle with the path she had once dominated with ease, he understood that patience, intelligence, and resolve could create change, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. As the SUV finally skidded to a complete halt, mud dripping from its sides and Karen's expression a mixture of surprise and indignation, Ethan felt an undeniable truth settle in his chest. This was no longer a battle he had to endure passively. This was a fight he could win. Max barked once sharply as if acknowledging the moment, and Ethan allowed himself a small smile. The farm, battered but resilient, had a chance at recovery, and more importantly, so did he. By the third day, the balance of power on Ethan's farm had shifted. Karen Whitmore, the embodiment of arrogance and entitlement, had encountered enough disruption to reconsider her daily shortcuts. The shiny black SUV she had once wielded like a weapon now bore the evidence of repeated miscalculations. Scratches along the paint, mud caked in hard-to-reach crevices, and the stubborn remnants of tomato pulp that refused to wash away completely. Each mark told a story of persistence, strategy, and the quiet resolve of a farmer who refused to be dismissed. Ethan observed from a distance as Karen finally steered away from the farm, her usual confidence replaced by frustration and a clear understanding that her previous advantage was gone. For weeks she had moved through his land as if it belonged to her alone, relying on privilege and audacity. But now the unpredictability he had introduced, the clever yet harmless obstacles had reminded her that actions have consequences, even when the person in question believes themselves untouchable. For Ethan, this was more than a victory over a single neighbor. It was a reaffirmation that determination and creativity could challenge injustice, no matter how daunting it seemed. Meanwhile, the farm itself was slowly recovering. Ethan spent long hours repairing the damage, replanting crushed tomatoes, straightening bent corn stalks, and tending the sunflowers back to health. The process was demanding, but every repaired patch felt like a small triumph, a tangible sign that resilience could overcome adversity. He meticulously documented the recovery, photographing the before and after contrasts, making notes about the strategy that had forced change without ever endangering anyone. This record was not only for himself, but also for the community. A guide showing how intelligence, patience, and perseverance could restore what was rightfully theirs. Word of Ethan's success spread quietly at first, then more broadly. Neighbors who had watched Karen's behavior with apprehension now whispered about the cleverness and determination displayed on the Miller farm. Ethan didn't boast, but he noticed the glances of admiration, the nods of respect when he walked through the neighborhood. His story had become a symbol. When faced with seemingly insurmountable entitlement, thoughtful action could level the playing field. He hadn't just reclaimed his land, he had reclaimed his dignity, transforming weeks of frustration and despair into a testament of quiet strength. Karen, confronted with the consequences of her own choices, avoided the area entirely. Her routine shortcuts had ended and the community felt a subtle shift. Rules and entitlement had been tested, and the outcome sent a clear message. Persistence, creativity, and patience were forces that could not be dismissed. Ethan's farm had survived the intrusion, and in doing so had set an example of how standing up for one's rights could inspire those around you without escalating conflict. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a golden glow across the fields, Ethan walked slowly through the restored crops. Max padded faithfully at his side, ears perked, sensing the calm that had returned. The wind carried the familiar scents of wildflowers and ripe fruit, mingling with the faint traces of disturbed soil, a reminder of the challenges that had been overcome. Ethan paused at the edge of the field, surveying the sunflowers swaying gently in the evening light. The sight was more than aesthetic. It was symbolic, a visual testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the rewards of steadfastness. For Ethan, the lessons were clear. Injustice, no matter how brazen, was not invincible. Careful observation, thoughtful action, and a refusal to be cowed could restore balance, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. His story would live on, not just in photographs or in the community's memory, but in the quiet understanding that patience and strategy could turn despair into triumph. As dusk settled, the colors of the sunset stretched across the fields, bathing the farm in a serene amber light. Ethan leaned on his shovel, Max lying contentedly beside him, and allowed a rare, deep breath of satisfaction to fill him. The farm was intact, his work honored, and his spirit renewed. Justice, even delayed and tested, had found its way back. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the fruits of his labor, he felt a profound sense of peace and pride, living proof that fairness and persistence, when combined, could create a powerful and lasting impact.